My name is Godwell Nhamo. I'm a professor with University of South Africa. I'm managing a chair there called the Exaro Chair in Business and Climate Change. And part of our main agenda is to do research that benefits the continent. And we are currently focusing on Sustainable Development Goals domestication across the continent, and also national governments and other lower tier levels of governments and corporates.
Thank you, Professor Nhamo, for joining us this afternoon. Can you please unpack for us the relationship between the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals?
Thank you. There has been some kind of a misconception or understanding in terms of the relationship between the Millennium Development Goals, which started in 2000, and that phase was ending in 2015. And the new development agenda for sustainable development to 2030, which kicked in 2016 January. Now, what we need to understand is the relationship is simple and straightforward. The MDGs had 8 development goals, and when we're busy developing the agenda for sustainable development to 2030, the MDGs were taken into consideration fully. And the idea was to come up with a new global development agenda which still addresses the key focus of poverty eradication. And hence those 8 MDGs are still reflected completely in the current agenda for sustainable development. The only challenge or the only difference could be that maybe some of the MDGs could have been split or others could have been merged. For example, a lot of MDGs that are dealing with health, maternity health, maternal health care, HIV, AIDS, those dealing with malaria, those have been merged into some other fewer SDGs. Whereas, for example, the MDG number 7 that was dealing with environment has been split into a number of SDGs. I'll just maybe highlight some of those SDGs. We've got an SDG on water, SDG on cities, SDGs on climate change, SDGs on biodiversity, SDGs on oceans, SDGs on sustainable consumption and production. All these are coming from the old environment Millennium Development Goal. So really there is quite a clear harmonization in terms of the Millennium Development Goals and the current new agenda for sustainable development to 2030. So the right reference to MDGs and SDGs is the SDGs. It brings a broader and expanded as well as more focused agenda to sustainable development.
What does domestication of the SDGs mean to the Pan-African Parliament and also to the African governments?
Yes, we are talking a lot around domestication and localization of the SDGs. The battle cry for the SDGs or the Agenda for Sustainable Development to 2030 is let us not leave anybody behind. Let no one be left behind. That is the battle cry. So what it means is this global development agenda should be brought to the lowest possible level. So if I'm going to start with maybe the Africa Union, the Pan-African Parliament, then we go to our national governments. Some of the national governments are arranged around states, like in Nigeria. Some are arranged around provinces, like in South Africa. Some are also arranged around counties, like in Kenya. So I say we need to see these SDGs landing at a national level, from which they will be also domesticated and blended to other lower tiers of government, including local government, corporates or companies, development agencies, and other organizations. So domestication really is mainstreaming these sustainable development goals into our national development agenda. So at a Pan-African Parliament level, we are saying with the organs and institutions that we have, are we familiar with these sustainable development goals? Who is going to be taking the lead in implementing these sustainable development goals? So in a nutshell, domestication is talking about how do we take that global agenda and put it at a level where it can be implemented. So we start there with the Pan-African Parliament, the institutions there, the permanent committees, like we were talking in the plenary. Which committee is going to be, for example, spearheading which sustainable development goal And like we saw a number of sustainable development goals will go to the permanent committee dealing with agriculture, food security, rural development, because there are a number of SDGs that are also addressing those issues, agriculture, environment, quite a number of them. Then we're also having, discussing in the plenary the idea of which committee, for example, will deal with sustainable settlements and cities. And there are some gaps that we noted there to say maybe because currently there's no permanent committee that is dealing with that, there might be a need to set up a similar institution that can address that, or just maybe get a caretaker permanent committee that can still drive that. The ultimate thing is once the sustainable development goals are domesticated, we have allocated roles and responsibilities within the Pan-African Parliament institutions, then our honorable members of parliament could take them to their countries, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Tanzania, across the entire continent, so that then, starting possibly with where they have got influence, which is oversight. So they oversee, the Pan-African parliamentarians, when they oversee in their in their countries, they oversee the executive. So the executive now need to be aware as well in terms of executing this agenda. So the Pan-African parliamentarians, their major role there in terms of domestication will be also to raise awareness within parliament, and also if they're going to be making even their the national laws, when they're dealing with passing of the budgets, then they need to understand that the resources are allocated to the right channels that can make implementation practical. I'll just give one example here, the central statistical offices, which are saying they need to be resourced well in terms of drawing up baselines, because we need data and accurate data for us to measure movement towards implementing these sustainable development goals. Another area is we need also to domesticate and localize in terms of allocating roles and responsibility within the executive. So we're saying, how does the government work in a particular country? Then when we understand that, we are saying, are we going to be lending these SDGs in the President's office, Prime Minister's office, Deputy President's office, or National Planning Commission, or if Finance Ministry? Then if we lend those SDGs there, what is going to happen? So in terms of some of the good practice cases that have been coming through, we mentioned, for example, I think Sierra Leone, which spoke about the agenda for prosperity and the establishment of sort of like a multi-stakeholder committee that is dealing with domestication of sustainable development goals. But we need to emphasize here to say, we don't need to change what has been working. Since we're coming from the era of the MDGs, Millennium Development Goals, there were institutions there in place already that were put to report on the MDGs. So I think it's only after auditing the adequacy or inadequacy of those institutions that we can think of other institutions. But if the institutions that were driving the MDGs are adequate, then we can still domesticate and lend the sustainable development goals within such institutions. Needless to say, because the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda for 2030 is a huge agenda, it might be advisable that maybe these are landed within a central coordinating platform or institution, in many cases which is the presidents of any country, or depending on the arrangement of other countries, it could be the planning commission. All this needs to have that kind of high-level political buy-in. And in the plenary, I also spoke around, as the honorable members of parliament go back home, they would need to ask themselves a number or a series of questions to say in terms of readiness for domesticating SDGs. So we identified a number of readiness pillars there, starting with asking the question, are we ready in terms of political buy-in and in terms of championing? If the answer is no, then it means something needs to be done. Are we ready in terms of our institutions, building capacity of institutions, both institutional capacity and also in individual capacity? If we are not ready, then that needs to be addressed. Are we ready in terms of financing? And there we emphasized a lot the idea of mobilizing resources domestically, because they are saying that the SDGs agenda is going to be driven by domestic mobilization of resources. It could be people, it could be financial resources, and other necessary resources that are required. Also ask the question, are we ready in terms of our policy and legislation, how our policy is playing out, how, for example, the national development plans, visions of our countries, if they are not aligned to the SDGs, then we are saying the next phase of revising such policies should also talk to the Sustainable Development Goals. At an African continent level, we asked the question around SDGs and their alignment to Africa Agenda 2063, whereby saying a good audit will be required to determine alignment between the SDGs and the Africa Agenda 2063. Then we also concluded there by saying, if we don't have programs and projects on the ground, then it's going to be a problem, because the programs and the projects on the ground will be our testimonies in terms of reporting. And like in the era of the MDGs, there's going to be periodic global reporting on the SDGs.
One last quick one. What is the importance of having a buy-in of the locals in the implementation of the SDGs?
Yes, any project that does not have buy-in in terms of the lowest levels, in terms of human or maybe institutional capacity, is bound to fail. So the reason why we're saying let's galvanize everybody, we are saying we need to follow the global theme of the SDGs, which says let no one be left behind. Thank you.